Hi everyone, I'm Jenny from Engineers Without Borders Australia, and I'm also here with Lizzie Brown, our CEO, and Phil Clark, our Chair of the Board as well. And what we're here today, what we're all here today, is to talk about how we're actually creating global engineers and what this movement is all about. And before I start and talk about how we've actually used the Alcoa funding to help progress this, I thought I would just share with you one of the best illustrations of how, what perceptions of engineering we actually have to change. And it was illustrated by Juan Lucena from the Colorado School of Mines. And what he did was he took some Google image searches of an engineer, and this is what comes up. This is the perception of engineering. It's and we laugh, but we know it's true. It's a lot of, it's a lot of looking at plans. It's a lot of using our technical skills to design and create and innovate. But there isn't much, people involved in this. A lot of men, yep, that's true. And there's also a lot of men compared to women in this room as well. So we should recognise that here too. And this is what comes up when we Google the word engineering. And so this is what people are designing, very technical drawings using a lot of words and systems. But I think what we've all been discussing throughout this meeting is actually how we change this perception to something more like this. And, what if the global engineer was about how we use those technical skills to actually work with people to create change and lead, to be able to lead a life of opportunity free from poverty. So at Engineers Australia, we received some of the Alcoa funding through EWB-International, and we use that to develop and deliver training modules for 3 of our programs. And I'll talk a little bit about these today. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander program, the EWB Challenge, and some of our leadership and training for our members. So if we start with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander program, this is really about creating long-term sort of two-way knowledge-sharing partnerships with Aboriginal community groups across Australia. And at the moment we have 7 of those located right around the country. And to give you a bit of background and idea about what these partnerships actually look like, I'll just show 2 examples. And the first one is with the Banyaralji Bubu Corporation, which is actually based, this has got a pointer, right up here in the Cape in Northern Australia. And this EWB actually plays a role for facilitating a 4-way partnership here. So it's between the Aboriginal Corporation, EWB, the Centre for Appropriate Technology, and an engineering company called Oricon. And together, these 4 partners actually work, on an infrastructure project, but again, over many, many years to build the capacity of some of the, the young youth in that region, but also to build the capacity of, the engineers from both Centre for Appropriate Technology and EWB and Oricon as well. So it was really about two-way knowledge sharing, through this infrastructure project. And I actually believe some of these young guys in this photo here were actually able to get some of their trade tickets through this project as well. Another example is with the Cooma traditional owners, and this is our oldest Aboriginal partnership. So the Cooma traditional owners are based in southwest Queensland. This is about a 12-hour drive directly west from Brisbane, the closest big city. And what this partnership, has been about a lot of dialogue. Again, there have been some projects done along the way, a waste management project and amenities. But over the 6 or 7 years, it has really been about forming relationships. They're now, considered family, and, hundreds of sort of EWB members have been able to spend time on country learning from the elders as well, and again have become part of that family. And so this is Cheryl Buchanan and Pop Dave and Wood here, and this was actually a time when we're all out on country to learn about the land and the environment and really to understand those cultural perceptions there. Now, through all of these partnerships, the way they're actually facilitated, though, is through a partnership manager, and this is where the Alcoa program actually comes into play. So, so the partnership manager is responsible for maintaining those relationships with the community organisation and then facilitating that interaction between the engineers and EWB members that are actually working alongside them on these programs. So what the Alcoa funding actually allowed us to do was to do a review of the existing training with some old past and existing sort of partnership managers, and being able to allow them to provide input into, you know, what was really needed, you know, what skills had they not received through their engineering career, what, you know, whether that be from when they were studying at university or whether that be through, you know, working in a corporation, what skills hadn't they picked up that they actually required to work in this setting. And so this allowed us to review that, see where those gaps were and develop new training. It also allowed us to deliver some of this training with the new partnership managers as well.
Jenny, one of the facets of your presentation that I found most interesting is that you talked about the role of partnership managers in EWB Australia. Can you tell me a little bit more about this role?
Sure. So partnership managers are responsible for maintaining relationships with our community-based partner organisations. And so what we were specifically talking about in the presentation today was that with our Aboriginal community partners. So would you like some more detail around what the partnership managers actually do, what
Absolutely.
Their role is? So they work with teams of people and work with the community directly. So that involves spending a lot of time with our partner organisations. I think one thing that's really important to understand in Aboriginal Australia is the importance of building up trust and building up that long-term deep connection and a mutual understanding of what each group is actually trying to work towards. And so some of these partnerships take years of conversations to actually develop. And a great example was with the Coomera traditional owners who were highlighted in the presentation. And that partnership actually started because Lizzie Skinner, so one of our EWB members, met Cheryl Buchanan, who's one of the elders of the Guamu Nation, so part of the Coomera traditional owners. And Lizzie actually went and spent time, I think 3 or 4 months, actually living with Cheryl and her family out on country, the traditional lands of Guamu people, just to listen and learn about what that community was actually trying to do and trying to achieve. And so the role of the partnership managers is to actually continue those conversations and build on it and build on those relationships, but then also facilitate relationships with our membership and our corporate partners to actually help those communities achieve projects that they want to work on. So one of the examples that I gave in the presentation was with a different organisation called the Bunyaralji Bubu Aboriginal Corporation. So in that case, it was a 4-way partnership, and the partnership manager was responsible for bringing together the community group, members from EWB, the Centre for Appropriate Technology, which is another sort of non-government organisation in Australia, and the engineering company Oricon, who donated sort of work time on that project. And they facilitated all those groups coming together to actually build a infrastructure project, which was around an amenities block and a ranger station. And that partnership manager had to facilitate the work of that in a capacity building manner for both the people within the community, but also with all of those other groups that were involved in the project as well. So what the Alcoa funding actually allowed us to do was to provide training to these partnership managers so that they could understand that role and that they could build the skills required to deliver that role effectively.
Perhaps if I can add, Vivis, the partnership managers will be integral in negotiating a 3-year partnership agreement between EWB and the community organisation. Within that 3-year agreement, there'll then be a specific set of objectives for the coming 12 months, as well as expectations for the different partners. So if it's a 4-way relationship, each partner will have their own set of expectations or deliverables, and the partnership manager then plays a role in keeping the group accountable, to the deliverables set out in that agreement, and then taking the group through a review process. So that might include reflection interviews as well as group workshops and conversations to look at the health of the partnership, the progress of the deliverables, and then look at next steps as well. So as EWB Australia has matured, that process has taken more structure and shape, and we have a very similar process with our international partner organisations, as well as a whole range of other community organisations that we work with in Australia.
These training packages are then were packaged up. They'll be able to be delivered in the future, and we'll also be able to make that available to anyone else that wants to have a look at them as well. So that's on one spectrum. That's that's engineers actually working out in communities. But what I want to spend more time talking about today is actually how we actually engage with the engineering factories, as Sal called them. How do we actually engage with those students to ensure that that perception of engineering is changed right from the word go, before they actually graduate and before they actually enter the sector. And this is where the EWB Challenge comes in. So the EWB Challenge is a first-year design program, and it's designed to introduce concepts of global engineering or social engineering or humanitarian engineering, whatever word we want to put on that, to university students. So it's delivered in partnership with EWB UK and New Zealand, and at the moment is reaching about 10,000 students across 52 universities.
One of the pillars upon which this conference has been running is this concept of collaboration between different national Engineers Without Borders organizations. And one great example of this that you touched upon was the EWB Challenge program. How does the EWB Challenge program fit into EWB Australia's larger organizational strategy?
Well, perhaps I might start and then hand over to you, Jenny. So the EWB Challenge is a design program that was initiated to introduce first-year engineering students to the social impact of engineering and technology. It's not intended to be an in-depth course or training program, but more an exposure, so that when students first start thinking about problem solving and working together in teams, and they do their first design project, it's not devoid of context. In fact, it's deeply rooted in a very specific community setting. So we're working towards introducing similar types of initiatives right the way throughout the undergraduate engineering program. Now, in terms of EWB Australia's work overall, we think this is critical because the impact we can create from transforming the Australian engineering sector will ultimately create in much broader change for communities than if we focused specifically on fieldwork alone. So we don't feel we could do only one or the other. The two are very complementary because the EWB Challenge is directly informed by the work of our community partners, and then the student ideas come back through to the community partner. But ultimately, if every Australian engineer, an engineering company, focused their core business and core work around creating a stronger social legacy, then hopefully at that point EWB Australia has done a big part of our work, and we can evolve to looking at the next wave of increased social impact in some other way.
Now, how does this actually work? So what we do each year is we choose one of our community-based partner organisations, and for an example, this at the moment we're working with Reignite Action for Development, which is one of EWB UK's partners based in Cameroon. And we sit down with these community groups and we run workshops to facilitate them to look at what projects they're working on now or what they want to work on in the future. And at this particular workshop, we had representatives from the local council, the mayor's office, the FON, who's the king or the chief of the area in Cameroon. We also had a lot of community group represented there as well. And this is another photo of that meeting. So from this, we take those projects and we actually package that up and give that to universities, where it's then embedded into curriculum. So these design projects cover areas anywhere from housing right through to climate change. And the universities take this and the students actually work on these as part of their coursework. So academics are delivering this in the classroom and students do this for assessment. And this is a photo, this is a photo of some students at the University of Queensland actually prototyping a design for water filtration. And the idea is by working on these real world projects, that these students are introduced to those concepts of global engineering and are actually allowed to explore what it means to create appropriate technologies. We then take those ideas that the students generate and we take them back to the community partner organisation. So effectively, it's a way for that partner organisation to crowdsource ideas from about 10,000 students. And then it's up to them of, how they actually want to implement those ideas. An example is of the floating biodigester that was created by students to solve sanitation and energy problems on the Thomlesap Lake in Cambodia. And the community group have now sort of built and piloted these biodigester and is looking at ways to scale that up to spread that technology around the Thomlesap. Now, what we actually have found through evaluation around the EWB Challenge program is the largest impact on student learning outcomes is actually what happens in the classroom. And so this actually comes down to the way the academics are teaching this program. And so, as Sal mentioned before, it's become increasingly important to engage with the universities and the academics around this. And so what the Alcoa program actually allowed us to do was to ramp up, that training and workshops with these academics. So we ran a series of workshops aimed at focusing on really exploring the context associated with the EWB Challenge. So academics aren't actually allowed to travel to Cameroon, for example, so allowing them to speak with someone who's been there so that they can then translate that context back to the students. But also around the design process and how this can be appropriate in this context. The feedback we got from this was that it was, yes, extremely valuable to talk to someone that's actually been to, spent time with the communities. But it was also great to be able to mix with other academics from, universities working on the same projects and actually to be able to share those ideas, share those teaching pedagogies, and workshop sort of challenges that they were having with students. And they also found the discussion on the engineering design process and how that applies to a development context, really useful as well. Most of the academics actually haven't had an opportunity themselves to work in this field, and they haven't got that experience, and so they find it very difficult to actually mentor students through this process in the classroom. And so the academics are really wanting opportunities to gain some of that knowledge and experience themselves. What they would like more of is more chances to workshop with other academics, more teaching resources, and more of the same sort of discussions. And I thought I would actually highlight, if I've still got some time, one of these actual discussion points. And it was around taking this traditional sort of looking, design process or engineering project life cycle and then actually applying it in the development context. And what we always talk about in this is using this, but doing that through a capacity building, mechanism. So how do you actually do this, but work with people from the community? How do you actually then get students to understand that when the students aren't, directly traveling to the community themselves? And how do you actually then, get students to understand the importance of that local context, and what impact that is actually going to have on the successful nature of the program. And it's really, one of the most interesting conversations was, yes, you can get students to understand and, look at those social aspects of the context, but then getting them to be able to learn how to translate that into coming up with appropriate designs is really difficult. And so how do we actually then, work with academics and get, to improve how they can mentor the students through this process? So, we also, and I'm not going to talk about this project much, but we also were able to develop some of those teaching resources that those academics were working for. And we're in the final stages of sort of looking at these and looking at how we can put them online to support them in the classroom. But what I really want to talk about is where do we go next with this? And so what we actually want to be able to do, and what we've been in discussions with EWB UK, is how can we then actually take some of these academics into the field with us when we're doing those initial scoping trips, doing those initial community meetings, to give them that first-hand experience. And so with EWB UK at the moment, we're designing a study tour to allow academics to do exactly that, but also to create an international forum where academics can come together again to talk about these issues, not just with academics from within Australia, but from around the world as well.
Lizzie, I'm going to give you an impossible challenge, but you're leading a strategy session today throughout the afternoon of the conference that's about the future of the EWB International organization and movement, and if we can imagine ourselves a few years from now where we would be, how would we get there, and what steps would our individual member associations take to get there. So in just a few seconds, or in just a few sentences, can you tell me what is your vision for where this organization will be 10, 20, 30 years from now?
My vision for this organisation in just 5 years is that we have forums like the one today on a very regular basis at a regional level, but also at a global level. I think we'd want to do this sort of thing at least annually. Obviously that's going to require resourcing to make happen, but it's just so critical to build the personal relationships between representatives of our organisations. I think what we'll see is some very structured collaborations around specific thematic areas like water and sanitation, or the provision of renewable energy, or food security. We'll also see a high level of industry involvement in those collaborations, so it won't just be EWB to EWB, it'll be 2, 3, 4 EWB groups, plus some universities, plus engineering companies, plus governments, plus Oxfam Australia or UNESCO, or other types of multilateral and bilateral organisations and civil society groups. In addition to that, I think we'll see strong regional collaborations to capacity build across the EWB groups. So I've just had a wonderful conversation with Ashok from EWB India about how we can really formalise the collaboration between our organisations. We'd love to learn about emerging social enterprise practices in India. He'd love a lot to learn, or his organisation would love to learn from us around how we can start influencing engineering education with initiatives like the Challenge. I think we'll see a big focus on sharing stories across our work, on global awards and recognition for outstanding programs and individuals as well, because I think celebrating the people is absolutely critical, not just the programs. And I think that EWB for the first time will be truly recognised as a mature global network of organisations rather than a disparate movement, which will bring new levels of influence. I'm sure by that point there will be funding from some of the major aid agencies, and some pretty serious conversations with government going on around how we influence the quality of infrastructure development and the social outcomes for communities in specific parts of the world.
So I thought I would leave it there, and I just wanted to thank Alcoa for the funding to actually allow us to do these projects, and EWB International for making that happen, and also the collaboration with EWB UK and Canada, and those discussions that we've had over the last few years and sharing of ideas around these projects as well. And it's been great, to actually meet these guys who have been speaking on Skype, as Sal said, actually face to face. So it's wonderful to be here in the same room. And also finally to invite anyone, to collaborate with us on this as well. Thank you. Any questions?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I have a quick question. I've seen you've talked about project in Cameroon, Cambodia, and New Zealand. I just want you to tell us about the critical role member organizations in these countries played. So you went to Cambodia or you went to Cameroon, you developed a project. You as the leader, and they are like your representative or your support in the country. Could you please elaborate on their role, or how important their role is?
Yeah, I think it's very important. And I think that's interesting when we're talking about the concept of a global engineer as well, and to be mindful that being a global engineer doesn't mean that, engineers from Australia, would travel over to, to Cameroon, for example, and actually, fill that engineering role. It should be about building that local capacity of engineering within that country. And so I think that translates to the member organisations within those countries playing a very critical role, in this process as well. So EWB Australia at the moment, and where is Ashok? Somewhere here. EWB Australia is actually working with EWB India and Sri Lanka and some of those member organisations as well to provide joint sort of projects and again share training materials and ideas in those countries. And I think that should be spread around the world. I think that would be a very interesting discussion perhaps to have here as well, is how do we facilitate those interactions and that collaboration. So yeah, I think essential is the answer. Yeah.
Jenny, I think what's really impressive about EWB Challenge is the scale that you guys managed to reach. And this is sort of, so my question is, in Canada, we struggled a little bit when we tried to focus on design projects in maintaining or sort of describing the context to the students who are attempting to do the design projects in Canada, without sort of steering on either ends of, in one end being a little bit oversimplistic and almost stereotypical or cliche of saying, well, people don't speak the language. You know what I mean? Just like very simplistic things that, someone would describe. Or on the other end, overburdening the design project, which is supposed to, and then frustrating the professor who wants to just see the 4-credit course come through. And to me, I think it's doable, and we managed to do it when we delivered it with staff that were trained. But you guys managed to reach great scale that for us, when we tried to get to that stage, we tried to use volunteers that. So I guess my question to you is like, what are the intentional pieces that you put for quality assurance on the student experience for the design project and on, is it the faculty? Like, how do you achieve that scale and quality at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think one that we're have been exploring over the last few years and still have a long way to go on as well. So there's a few sort of aspects to that. I think one was about sort of achieving that scale and how did we get that maybe buy-in from the universities in the first place. And the other was around the quality, thing of actually how it's delivered in the universities. So the first one around scale, so Lizzie actually, started the EWB Challenge in Australia, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Lizzie, but I think one of the most important things that she actually did was to go to the Australian Council of Engineering Deans, Engineers Australia, and talk to them about the importance of these programs and get that endorsement. And the next thing Lizzie spent a lot of time doing was talking to the academics themselves in those early years. And that, I think, what was that allowed it to sort of jump from a few sort of pilot universities to how many in that first year again? Like 4 to 17 in that, in that first year. But it was around, I think, what was crucial was those conversations and getting that buy-in. And in terms of scale, it's, that's still what's really essential is, having those interactions with the academics. So we also spend a lot of time at, the engineering education forums within Australia and making sure that we're actually a part of that community to promote these discussions. And then your second question was around quality control and assurance in the universities. And that's a difficult one because we don't really have control over that. As I said before, the biggest impact is, how it's actually taught in the classroom, and the academics themselves have control over that. So it varies from universities in how it's delivered. Some incredibly well, where they're building prototypes and talking with communities and have a whole series of workshops on cross-cultural awareness and appropriate technology, to others that are just kind of starting out on that journey. But I think it's things like these training programs, again, and working with those academics, collaborating on sort of engineering education programs. We're at the moment working with the Australian National University to develop a course in humanitarian engineering. So it's about, again, just those partnerships that I think helps us ensure that quality. But I think we've still got a fair bit of work to go there. I think the other thing that's important to note is that this is a first year course. So this just hits students entering university, and it's really only designed to be an introduction. Again, because students aren't actually getting that first-hand experience, which really needs to happen to solidify these learning outcomes. And so what we're looking at is something, and similar to your your certificate, and how we can actually create a pathway for these students to build progressively up on that experience. And so how do we take it from first year to, second, third, fourth, and create that in-depth and cumulative sort of experience for the students? And that's something that we're working on, so through collaborations with things like the Australian National University as well. But I think we've got a long way to go in that space too.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, you have a question, Lizzie.
No, I was just going to make a comment because I didn't see other hands up. I think what's also important to mention is that our student members have often become very actively involved in tutoring the EWB Challenge subject. So they'll get involved in their first year of study, they'll then join our student chapters, they'll, through that process, get the opportunity to work with some of our community partners and go through a massive education process, and then come back and tutor when they're in third, fourth year or postgraduates. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is that we have an undergraduate research program and a summer internship program, and we're asking the summer interns to work with us to develop case studies that can then slot into ultimately every course in Australia. So if you come and do a summer internship with us, you might work on our Journal of Humanitarian Engineering to share research outcomes, but you'll also be expected to develop some sort of case study, perhaps for the advanced thermodynamics subject you've just done, that contextualises that often very dry technical content in a strongly social or community-focused way.
And that's, I think, essential to, I can't remember who mentioned it before, about the concept of, a global engineer not being separate, a separate thing, but being really integrated, into our vision of what, an engineer should be. And so by, learning thermodynamics through examples of, where you can actually apply this socially, that's kind of perpetuating that idea as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.